The Qatar GP was far from your typical F1 race. F1 drivers had to hit the pits at least 3 times during Sunday's race, and they were capped at just 18 full laps per stint. And if that wasn't tough enough, some of the drivers actually puked inside their helmets because of the scorching heat at the Qatar Grand Prix. It was, without a doubt, one of the most grueling races ever, both for the drivers and everyone else involved. Now, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of what went down. Let's begin with the reason for the regulation change. Following the free practice sessions in Qatar over the weekend, Formula One found itself in the midst of a major tyre-related crisis, one that hasn't been seen since the notorious 2005 US GP. Back in 2005, Michelin runners faced tyre failures in practice, leading them to withdraw after the formation lap. This left just 6 Bridgestone-equipped cars, 2 Ferraris, 2 Jordans and 2 Minardis to compete. Fast forward to last weekend in Qatar, a similar issue was discovered by Pirelli late on Friday evening. What sets this apart is that it affected the entire field. Unlike the 2005 incident, the FIA swiftly responded with a contingency plan. Surprisingly, there were no visible issues reported by teams after FP1 and main qualifying. The problem only surfaced after Pirelli conducted its usual Friday night analysis of used tyres, those returned by teams after FP1 and no longer required. Typically, this process involves dissecting sample tyres, and nothing out of the ordinary is discovered. However, on this particular evening, Pirelli detected problems with multiple tyres that had completed 20 laps or more. The FIA was promptly alerted, and a plan was devised with the involvement of Nicolas Tombazis, the single-seat director. The governing body revealed in a statement, a separation in the sidewall between the topping compound and the carcass cords on many of the tyres that were checked was discovered. It was clear that subjecting these tyres to additional laps could lead to circumferential damage and air loss. The tyre issue wasn't entirely unexpected, as there were similar problems in Losail in 2021. The revised curbs, particularly at turns 12-13, drew attention from teams and drivers even before the cars hit the track on Friday. The FIA statement clarified that the problem likely stemmed from the high-frequency interaction between the tyre sidewalls and the 50mm pyramid curbs commonly used at this circuit. This interaction was exacerbated by cars frequently riding these curbs. Essentially, the outer sidewalls took hits as cars ran along the steep outer edge of the curbs, while the inner sidewalls suffered as cars dropped over the 50mm curb and navigated the rough terrain beyond the hard edge. It was the consistent pounding on the sidewalls over multiple laps, coupled with high G loadings, that made these tyres susceptible to damage. In light of the tyre issues encountered during the Qatar Grand Prix weekend, the FIA promptly responded by making alterations to the track limits at turns 12-13, primarily for the sprint races. This adjustment was focused on the areas where most of the tyre damage occurred, aiming to curtail the problem of cars running too wide. To help drivers adapt to the modified track layout, an additional 10-minute familiarization practice session was added before the shootout. The idea was to give drivers a chance to get used to the altered conditions. However, despite the Saturday sprint's efforts, the risk associated with extended tyre stints remained a concern. When the alterations to track limits failed to yield the desired results, F1 introduced a mandate for every driver to complete a minimum of 3 pit stops in Sunday's main race. Furthermore, there were restrictions in place. New tyres were limited to a maximum of 18 laps, and tyres used during qualifying were allowed to last for up to 22 laps. Now the question is, why wasn't this tyre problem anticipated? Pirelli did report on puncture issues after the 2021 race, but the new curbs were installed only recently, leaving little time for inspection. Since these curbs were of a common design, no one initially thought they'd be problematic. Plus, the internal tyre damage seen this time was unprecedented. Other factors had changed too, like the track resurfacing and increased car weight, altering the conditions significantly. So in hindsight, no one really saw this particular problem coming. However, tyre-related issues weren't the only challenge F1 drivers faced in Qatar. Just 2 weeks earlier, Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris were all smiles after the Japanese Grand Prix. They relaxed, watched race replays and chatted. But after the Qatar Grand Prix, it was a different story. Norris was seen with an ice-filled towel, Verstappen looked drained and even joked about needing a wheelchair, while Piastri lay flat out. The sweltering conditions had taken a toll on the drivers, and even Logan Sargent retired due to feeling unwell. Lance Stroll needed a medical check and Alex Albon had heat exposure. Qatar's harsh racing conditions, with temperatures hovering around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 32 degrees Celsius, and humidity at approximately 70%, pushed Formula One drivers to their limits on Sunday. Charles Leclerc of Ferrari summed it up, saying, "This is the toughest race, I think. For every driver in F1 of our career, for everybody. I don't believe anyone that says it's not." As the drivers made their way to the media pen after the race, the physical toll of their exertion was evident. Most were drenched in sweat and had towels around their necks. Some, like Nico Hülkenberg, had to leave early to cool down. Liam Lawson even sported an ice vest with his overalls partially undone. Several arrived slightly late, having used ice baths to lower their body temperatures. It was so chilly that George Russell had to put on a jumper. There can be misconceptions outside the racing world about how demanding it is to drive F1 cars and the level of physical conditioning required. These athletes must be incredibly fit and strong merely to handle the gravitational forces and physical strains their bodies endure during races. However, the intense heat in Qatar took the physical challenge to another level. While the race was held at night, starting at 8 p.m. local time, temperatures remained exceptionally high. It had reached over 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 40.6 degrees Celsius during the day, and only dropped to around 90 degrees Fahrenheit when the race began. Inside the cramped cockpit with the engine behind them and hot air blowing towards them, the drivers couldn't escape the heat. Valtteri Bottas described the sensation as almost torturous, stating, "The temperature in the cockpit started to be almost too much. The feeling is like torture in the car. Any hotter than this would not be safe." Although drivers have access to water through a tube connected to drink bottles in their helmet, the high temperatures can turn into what Leclerc humorously referred to as tea. This leads to serious dehydration concerns. Leclerc further explained, "It's not even physical preparation, it's just dehydration. It's at such a level that your vision deteriorates, your heart rate soars, and it's very difficult to control all of this. It was really, really difficult." Several factors converged to turn the Qatar Grand Prix into an intense physical challenge for Formula One drivers. First and foremost was the scorching ambient temperature. While F1 had previously raced in Qatar in 2021, it was in late November when the weather was relatively cooler. However, this time, the race took place at the beginning of October, and the heat was relentless. Adding into the discomfort, there was a lack of the usual breeze that had provided some relief earlier in the weekend, making it even more challenging for the drivers to stay cool. It's worth noting that next year's race in Qatar is scheduled for December 1, when the temperatures are expected to be more tolerable. Another significant factor was the decision to limit the number of laps per tyre stint for safety reasons. By making it a mandatory 3-stop race, drivers could push harder without worrying as much about tyre management. This magnified the physical demands of the drivers. Despite their rigorous physical conditioning, many drivers found themselves pushed to their limits, especially those engaged in race-long battles that required extra effort. It prompted several drivers to suggest that F1 had reached, if not exceeded, the maximum heat level for them to comfortably race in. This has sparked discussions about the conditions and their implications for future races in the sport. With all that happened at the Qatar weekend, we are happy that there was no casualty whatsoever. Now over to you. What's your thought about all the issues experienced at the Qatar GP? Let us know in the comments section below. That will be all for today's video. Thanks for staying tuned. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so that you can always get to watch more amazing videos like this. See you in the next video.